Say it with me, everybody. Lewis Cine, Minnesota Viking. Vikings take the Georgia safety at pick 32. We're going to talk about the trades. We're going to talk about the safety. We're going to talk about what happens next today on the Locked On Vikings podcast.
You are Locked On Vikings, your daily Minnesota Vikings podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome, everybody, to another episode of the Locked On Vikings podcast. Can you tell I'm jazzed? Because it was draft day. It happened. Now we have stuff to talk about, players to break down, super exciting stuff. As always, I am your host, your pal, and the kid you copied off in math class. My name is Luke Braun. You can find me on Twitter at Luke Braun NFL. Shows on Twitter at Locked On Vikings. Thank you so much for making Locked On Vikings your first listen of the day every single day. Thank you so much to all of you who hung out for the live stream of the draft that I did. I definitely thought that was only going to be an hour, and then Kwesi decided to trade to the literal last pick of the night. So that went way longer, and all y'all stuck around and hung out with me. It was a super, super blast of a time. Thank you to everybody, and thank you to everybody that popped over to the Locked On NFL show with me afterwards as well. It happened. The Vikings made a selection. It wasn't where we thought it would be, and it wasn't really somebody that we talked about a lot on this show. I definitely feel like I didn't prepare you well enough for Lewis Cine, and so I apologize for that. But we got some catching up to do on this guy. Because honestly, I thought he was going to go somewhere in the 30s, and I don't think the Vikings were going to pick there, and turns out they're picking there twice, at least as of this recording. So we'll talk about the trade. We'll talk about Lewis Cine. We'll talk about the kind of what happens next. But I guess I want to start with the player. Let's start with the actual guy the Vikings got, because we got to talk about the trade and going from 12 to 32, and Hamilton was on the board and all that stuff. We'll get to that. I want to talk about the guy, though. The actual Lewis Cine. A lot of people are just kind of saying he's a safety, and let's talk about what it's like to draft safety. But what kind of safety? Who is he? Is he fast? Is he slow? All that stuff. And the answer to that question is the big one. The thing you need to know most about Lewis Cine is that he is fast. He ran fast, 4.37 speed. That's phenomenal for a safety. He thinks fast. He reacts fast. He triggers downhill fast. He changes his direction fast. Everything about him is fast. He looks like the game is just like really slow to him. And everything is very natural and comfortable. I talk a lot about like thinkers and feelers, and how, players, sometimes you can see players thinking and they're not playing on instinct. They're still sort of making decisions like live in real time, and you kind of have to have a little bit more instinct than that. You have to make decisions a little faster than that. And to do that, you have to be feeling it out, and you have to be able to kind of play on instinct. And then there are players who do play on instinct, but they don't think at all. And you can almost exploit that instinct where they're just kind of playing on pure feel and animalistic, just like their lizard brain. And there isn't like a lot of like real-time thought going into it. And then you kind of reach the confluence of these two things where it's almost like muscle memory, where you're not thinking, not because you don't know what to think about and you're really just sort of playing based on instinct, but because you are so used to thinking about it and you're so used to what they're doing. You're so familiar and comfortable. I am going to guess that Lewis Cine absolutely grinds the film room because you can see that on tape, and he's so comfortable that it just is really, really natural. I think some of his assignments at Georgia were a little easier, and so they helped him. When it's man coverage, your guy goes across the formation, and all you have to do is run with him and then kind of get upfield and make a tackle. That's an easier thing to process than, being in crazy coverages. But like, he's also making calls, right? Like he'd play the apex, and the Georgia runs the defense that we learned with Zimmer. It's very similar. And so he would have to make like an undercall and, signal to his teammate, hey, this is mesh. Somebody's going under there, and I need to come get the crosser that's coming my way. And he would understand that, know how to communicate it and all that stuff. So this is very much, if you want this in a cliche, pro ready. He's a pro ready guy. He's knows what he's looking at, and he's really, really, really comfortable with it. And he's fast. So if he did want to stay back and like take a longer time to make a decision. He can afford to do that because he has the speed to recover any of that lost time, but he also doesn't need that. So he just gets everywhere early, and then he can start making plays on the ball and be involved in plays he doesn't have any business being involved in. That is really where Lewis Cine rules. That's what he has that he can do. And he can play single high. That's not what he's best at, but you could rotate him into single high safety and he won't be a total disaster there. Mostly he should be a box safety, really big in run support and all that stuff because he's so good at knifing through angles and finding where he's supposed to be. And he's good at angles, not great. He takes some young man angles, like some, I think I'm a little faster than I am angles that got him against Jameson Williams a couple times. In various games against Alabama where Jameson Williams is just a little faster than you expected him to be and you took the wrong angle. But he's generally pretty good at that. And he can also man cover pretty well. He mirrors pretty well against like slot receivers or tight ends and stuff. I mean, you're not going to put him up against somebody's number one wide receiver. He's a safety and he's not a corner at all. But he's good enough at that to do what safeties need to do in that regard. And what that means is you get all the versatility that you kind of want out of a safety, that I've been looking for out of a safety. So he checks that box for me. What you need to know about his weaknesses, the reason that he's there at 32 and he wasn't a top 15 player is tackling. And he's got a tackling issue. What that tackling issue is, I think is pretty fixable. So he plays at like 6'3", 199, and he looks on the field like he's about 15 pounds lighter than that. Both in his speed, but also in his in his oomph, in his tackling ability. And maybe he did play lighter than that, and he just bulked up for the weigh-ins. But like he also ran a 4.37, so if he did get all that bulk on him, then it's fine. But he goes really high with his pads, and you can get away with that against a lot of college running backs. But NFL running backs are going to bowl this dude over. Because he doesn't know, he doesn't naturally and consistently enough. There are plays where he does it, but he doesn't consistently get low on ball carriers. I want to see him attack hips. I want to see him wrap and take down. There's a lot of launching, a lot of just looking to light the guy up, and he is a hard hitting. You're going to hear that about him a lot. He's a thumper, he's a hard hitting safety to go with the hit man, and you're going to get all this excitement about our hard hitting safeties. But there's a lot of hit a guy really hard and then bounce right off him like he barely noticed you. And you're going to get a lot of that in the NFL if he doesn't clean up his tackling. And by clean that up, I mean just learn to get low. Learn to wrap up a little bit more. He wraps up sometimes, but he doesn't wrap up consistently. And if that doesn't get fixed, and if he doesn't play with a little bit more bulk, a little bit more, sand in his pants, as we talk about with O-line, he might end up launching and getting a leave your feet habit. And that's kind of how Sendejo turned into the flag machine that he was that he left his feet a lot, and then that's 15 yards. He doesn't have that habit, but this is kind of what that tackling problem turns into down the line if it goes unaddressed. So that's what you have to do to really complete him as a prospect. He's an incomplete prospect, a little bit of assembly required, and that's why he's down at 32. But we'll talk about the trade. We'll talk about why the Vikings got into that trade, got into pick 32, how they got it. We'll talk about trading with the Lions, all that stuff in just a second. But first, let me talk to you about Shady Rays. Shady Rays is an independent sunglasses company that gives you the features of $200 sunglasses for a fraction of the price. That means polarized lenses, well-constructed durable frames, and premium high-end finishes. Also, something you won't find anywhere else is Shady Rays' insane protection program. Shady Rays includes lost and broken protection on every pair. They send you a brand new pair if you lose them, no matter what happened. Give them a try, and if you don't love them, you'll pay nothing. Simple as that. Plus, 10 meals will be donated to fight hunger in America when you shop with Shady Rays exclusively. For our listeners, head to shadyrays.com and use promo code LOCKEDON to get 50% off 2 or more pairs of polarized sunglasses. That's code LOCKEDON, LOCKEDON, all one word, for their best deal of the season. 50% off of 2 or more pairs of Shady Rays sunglasses, backed by over 150,000 verified 5-star reviews. Thanks once again for making Locked On Vikings your first listen of the day. Let's talk about the trade. So the trade itself, I mean, you can just sort of look at it on the charts and see how you decide to feel, right? On the Rich Hill chart, which is the one I've been using because it's the one that kind of tells you how much picks typically cost, the Vikings didn't come out ahead. on this. The Lions came out ahead on this one by about a third-round pick on the Rich Hill chart. On the new Rich Hill chart, he just recalibrated it to include some of the more recent trades. So it's like the most recent version. The Vikings came out behind by about a third-round pick. If they had given up, if you're unfamiliar, by the way, the trade is the Vikings gave up picks 12 and 46. The Lions gave up picks 34, 32, and 66. I don't know why I said it in that order, but yeah. So the Vikings get a first, a second, and a third, technically. And, very low first, very high second, very high third. And the Vikings gave up their first and second. That trade, work it out on the charts. Vikings come out behind by a scotch. And not a scotch, by a third round pick. That's like a pretty good amount. And if they had given up pick 77 instead of pick 46, if they gave the third back instead of the second back, it would have been about even money. So it's not a matter of like weird exact change. It's not a matter of, some strange kind of dynamic or if anything, the Lions trying to come up with a division rival probably should have cost them more. The Vikings just got out negotiated. That's first time GM got out negotiated by Brad Holmes. That's kind of what happened here. I don't think there's really any secret explanation to it. That's it. I think he might have been a little too eager to make a deal. Considering that, and he said this after the draft, the draft board fell. Derek Stingley goes third. Sauce Gardner goes fourth to the Texans and Jets respectively. And at that point, he said, things broke early in a way we knew trading down was going to be our best option. So trading down was always going to be the thing for the Vikings. I don't think they really thought about picking at 12 at all, which is interesting for two reasons. One, because that puts you in a really bad negotiating spot if you don't have the confidence, I can walk away from this deal if I don't like it. And two, and I think that contributed to why the deal was not great for the Vikings. And two, Kyle Hamilton was on the board. And if you're going to draft a safety, Kyle Hamilton was there. I mean, you've been listening to me rave about him for like 3 weeks. He's a top 3 player on my board. So that was really disappointing. I was bummed to lose out on Kyle Hamilton. I would much rather have Kyle Hamilton than Lewis Cine. In terms of would I rather have Kyle Hamilton or would I rather have, Lewis Cine and a little bit of extra draft capital on day 2? Talk to me tomorrow. I'll figure it out when I know who the players are. It'll be a lot easier to parse for me. But make no mistake, I've always had Lewis Cine as a first-round player. Some people had him as a second-round player. I have him as a first-round player. I think he has a lot of really elite traits that are really, really exciting. And the thing you need to fix is he just needs better tackling form. But that's something that's a lot easier to drill than, like, angles or, like, how to read coverages, right? So that's not as bad. But there's also the idea of, wait, they took a safety. What's up with that? We have Cam Bynum, don't we? And I've always disagreed with that, but I'll kind of reiterate my point here. Cam Bynum played 2 games, y'all. Like, they were a good 2 games. He got an interception on Lamar Jackson, and that was really cool. And I like Cam Bynum, but I don't want to anoint him with the job. And I don't think a 4th-round rookie who played 2 games and was okay in them should affect your draft strategy. I don't think that's a prohibitively good player. Just, take the player that you like. And at that point on the board, at least on my big board, Lewis Cine was my favorite player next to Malik Willis, which I understand is a pipe dream. They extended a quarterback 46 days ago. They're not going to draft a quarterback in the first round. So setting aside the pipe dream of Malik Willis, who, by the way, is still on the board as of this recording at the end of round 1, and that'll affect round 2, which we'll talk about, Lewis Cine was my favorite player there. So I agree with the selection at 32 pretty wholeheartedly. I disagree with passing on Kyle Hamilton and then not getting enough back. The idea of not taking Kyle Hamilton and then splitting across those assets, whatever the difference is between Kyle Hamilton and Lewis Cine is going to be for you to decide for yourself. But whatever that difference is, that versus, that on one side versus like a whole nother 2nd round pick on the other side is pretty, or a whole nother 3rd round pick on the other side is like pretty good, and moving the 2nd round pick way up. I think you probably could have justified that, but I think giving up 46 instead of 77 kind of is the difference. So my take on the trade is the idea of trading from 12 to 32. It's a long way down, and I wish they would have gotten a 1st-round pick. They didn't get enough back. I don't hate the idea of trading down and passing Kyle Hamilton to get Lewis Cine. You can talk me into that, but you got to get more than what they got for that. So that's kind of where I'm at. I think they just got out negotiated, and they didn't quite get enough back. First-time GM. Hopefully we learn some lessons, we move on. And I want to talk about this in a lot more detail later. Harrison Smith, Cameron Bynum, Lewis Cine on the field at the same time. Contrary to popular belief, that rocks because all of those guys can theoretically be put in all three positions of box safety, slot corner, or high safety. They can all do all of those things, right? And some of those guys are better at some things than others. And you wouldn't like specialize, like you wouldn't put Lewis Cine as just a slot corner. You wouldn't do that with really any of those guys, but they can all rotate down and play it. And so that makes it really hard for quarterbacks. If those three guys are on the field, it makes it really hard for those quarterbacks to discern who is doing what and therefore discern what the coverage is, especially because Donatel's scheme is going to hide a lot of stuff with alignments. Alignments will not be trustworthy information for quarterbacks. So things are going to be a lot harder for quarterbacks. And Cine has the versatility to make it so that like you don't get punished for doing that by putting him in some job that he can't do. So that's all really exciting. One other thing to consider is that this was a division rival. This is the Lions, which means you're playing whoever they pick twice a year. And so letting them come up and get the guy that they're clearly in love with, they're trading up with them, is it's just got to come at a higher price, right? And it didn't, and that's really disappointing. And look, clearly the Vikings didn't like Jameson Williams. The way Kwesi talked about it, it sounded, just context clues, like they knew that the Lions would be picking Jameson Williams and that the Lions knew how the Vikings were thinking about like players on the board there and stuff. And Kwesi and Brad Holmes are friends. This is not an adversarial relationship, obviously, but you're going to now have to play Jameson Williams twice a year. You must be really, really, really low on him, and the Lions must be really, really high on him. So you better hope your department's right, and all these scouts that were already here that you just met that you didn't fire. So you better hope the eval's right. And so that's like another reason that the tax needs to be a little higher. I want to kind of put a pin in Lewis Cine for now. We are not even close to done talking about him, but I want to put a pin in him for now because we're still in the middle of draft weekend, and we got 3 picks tomorrow now, y'all. So let me talk to you about that. We'll talk about what they're going to do at 34. They have 66, and then they still have pick 77 that they started the weekend with. And then, of course, day 3, so we'll see kind of what happens there. But first things first, let me talk to you about Built Bar. Built Bar is the best tasting protein bar on the planet, covered in 100% chocolate. They even have their Built Puffs, which is like a marshmallowy one. They have like a churro marshmallow puff, a key lime pie one that tastes like marshmallow covered in chocolate, or flavored marshmallow covered in chocolate, like a candy bar that would be like that, or something you would get on Easter weekend. But like 130 calories in one of these bad boys, like 4 grams of sugar. Compare that to a regular candy bar that's like 300 grams of sugar and like 30 calories. And this guy's got 17 grams of protein in it. So it's even a thing you can do post-workout or just as a late night guilt-free snack. So head on over to built.com, enter promo code LOCKED15, LOCKED15, and you get 15% off of your order. That's promo code LOCKED15 at built.com. Moving on. That's our day 1 recap for now. Let's talk about what's left on the board in day 2. And I think the biggest headline nationally is that Malik Willis is still on the board. Only one quarterback goes first round, and that's Kenny Pickett. That's the only first-round quarterback in this whole draft. Malik Willis, Desmond Ridder still on the board. Guys like Carson Strong, Sam Howell, Matt Corral, if you're into them, still on the board. So all the quarterbacks are, I think we're going to have a lot of quarterbacks on day 2. And what that puts the Vikings in a position for, because they're not going to take one of these quarterbacks, right? They just extended Kirk Cousins, right? So they're not going to take a quarterback in this draft, at least not like a serious attempt at a quarterback. They might take some flyer in the 7th round, but they're not going to take a serious quarterback in this draft. As much as you might want them to, don't get your hopes up. They're not going to do it. But that means that teams will want to. And I don't think anybody expected Malik Willis. I didn't expect Malik Willis to get out of the top 10, let alone the first round entirely. So I think if Malik Willis is still on the board, and they pick 34th, so only Tampa Bay, who traded down with Jacksonville, only Tampa Bay picks before the Vikings tomorrow. So if Tampa Bay doesn't select Willis or trade with somebody who's going to select Willis, that will mean Malik Willis will be on the board for the 3rd time, and the Vikings are going to pass on him for the 3rd time. So if you like Malik Willis a lot, so get ready to get mad about that. But they might trade down. There's going to be a bit of a quarterback tax. That's going to be the part where teams in the mid kind of ranges of the 2nd round and around the 40s are going to try to trade up and get Malik Willis. And that there might be a lot of value to be had there. You might be able to kind of charge a tax the way I wish the Vikings did in their 1st round trade. So be prepared for another trade down, I guess. If you didn't trade down, let me just read off some of the guys on my big board that are still there that I would really, really like. Andrew Booth is, I think, probably my favorite player on the board outside of Malik Willis, but I understand that's a pipe dream. Logan Hall, Kyler Gordon. If you walk away with one of those three and Lewis Cine, I am deeply, deeply satisfied, even after accounting for that the first round trade was bad value. Incorporate that in. I'm still really, really happy because you walked away with two good players on defense, and you really, really helped the unit that needed it so bad. You've already done some of that, right? Like, you can go through a game and not have to play Chandon Sullivan, which is nice because you can do the 3 safety thing all day if you really wanted to. Like, there's an option there. There's competition to be had there. But if you could get Booth or Kyler Gordon, if you could get Logan Hall, then we're really cooking with gas. Later in the second, there are other names that I'd be okay with. Roger McCreary, if you want another cornerback out of Auburn, somebody I kind of wish I could have talked about a little bit more. Boye Mafe, Minnesota edge rusher. We're kind of getting into his range. DeMarvin Leal is a guy that I really like out of A&M as a sort of interior pass rusher. Perion Winfrey's another one. Those are a few names. There's also Nakobe Dean, who I have a little lower on my board, mostly because of a need-fit thing. But a lot of people say he's the best player left on the board, and I'm hard-pressed to disagree with them. Like, just rawly, best guy, like, kind of eschewing need and just, like, for the whole board. He's number one on a lot of people's board. Really hard to disagree with him. It's more about what do the Vikings need out of a linebacker if they take one kind of thing. That said, I still would absolutely take him in the second round. So those are some names to look at if the Vikings were just to pick at 34. Otherwise, they're trading back. And here's the thing. A lot of the second-round players went, and I don't love kind of what's left. So of these players, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. There are 13 players left that I would take before the third round turns over. So I don't want to trade back too far, right? If they trade back 20, then they have a different opinion on the depth than I do. But their actions, and I'll kind of leave you with this, their actions are telling you a little bit about how they view the draft, right? They wouldn't have behaved the way that they did if they thought Kyle Hamilton was as far ahead of Lewis Cine as I did. I saw Kyle Hamilton as a top 3 player on the entire board. If you had a chance to draft that at 12, you slam it. They clearly don't share that opinion, right? They probably thought Hamilton and Cine were a little bit closer in terms of their ability. It's not a take I have to agree with, but I'll respect that they think that way, and then that's how they're going to proceed. With the trade, they probably are working more off of an outcome-based trade chart. The trade chart I've been using is about what trades actually happen and what they tend to cost. It's a cost-based chart. If you want to move up from 32 to 12, it typically costs this, and the Lions only paid that. But on all of the other trade charts with that are based on outcome, that are based on how much do you typically get out of pick 32 versus how much do you typically get out of pick 12, all of those say the Vikings won the trade. So you kind of exist in this weird no man's land between what actually happens and what has sort of tended to happen over time, or what teams have kind of thought would happen over time, and then what actually ends up happening when all is said and done. And so like the PFF's charts, Over the Caps charts, ESPN's analytics department, a lot of the super nerd charts that are much more about, hey, what's more valuable, pick 12 and 46 or picks 32, 34, and 66. The latter group has tended to be more valuable over history, but going from the latter group to the former group over history used to be more expensive than it was. That's kind of the way that goes. So what that tells us about Kwesi is that he is working on more outcome-based trade charts. He's not trying to make it cost what it costs through history. He's trying to say, well, I think these trades are going to get us. And I also kind of think that I think they were priced into trading down the way the board fell. If they didn't like Kyle Hamilton, the board was barren. And so you trade down because if you don't like Kyle Hamilton, he was the only player on that board that I liked outside of Malik Willis, who also probably not an option for them. So if you take those two guys off the board, that board stinks. And then I fully support a trade down. But if you're priced into it and other teams know that, they know that they can get away with a lower offer and it puts you in a bad negotiating position. All these things are lessons learned. And all these things are lessons we can learn about Kwesi. If he's just way more willing to trade down because he's way more willing to work on the outcomes, probably means we can more safely project trade downs in the future. The future being day 2 of this draft, but also like other drafts. And we might just be an even more trade down heavy team than we were with Rick Spielman, although maybe not for a bunch of 7th round picks. Maybe it's for 3rd and 4th round picks or something. Maybe he prefers different kinds of deals. All that stuff still probably has to shake out over the next couple of years as we learn about our new general manager. But here's the deal. A lot of people are really, really upset about trading down and getting Cine. A lot of people just hadn't heard of Lewis Cine because they didn't look into the safeties that would be taken around 30, which you're forgiven, but learn who the guy is before you pass judgment on him, I think. But the guy they got, I think y'all are going to learn to love him. Especially when you see the sort of playmaking ability he has to go from one hash to the other, 30 yards down the field, totally explode out of a cannon, and reasonably make a tackle, tenaciously make a tackle. He's got big, long arms, and he can wrap guys up. He just doesn't have the beef to go as high as he does. Just get your pads down, and you're a stud. That's kind of the size of Lewis Cine. So we will talk again tomorrow morning. Don't usually have Saturday morning episodes, but we're going to have a Saturday morning episode and a Sunday morning episode this week because it is the draft, and I'm here to break everything down for you. So make sure you tune in. Enjoy day 2 of the draft. Make sure you check out all the other Locked On NFL draft stuff. We had a live show that went awesome last night. Really cool stuff there. I will see you all tomorrow. And as always, Skol.